Hi, I'm John Rallison, and you are listening to or watching our Bible study on Revelation. Today we are covering Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 to 11, the writing to the church at Smyrna. And I'm glad you're with us. So first of all, we're going to always have to get our front matter out of the way, which includes my email. It's john@journeyoflife.org. No spaces, dashes, underscores, or anything. John, John, @journeyoflife.org. If you're watching this in the fall or winter of 2017 and you want to email me questions, I will try to get to them in the course of recording these online Bible studies. But you can always email me later and I'll try and answer them too, but they won't make it into this Bible study webinar podcast thing that I'm doing. And to keep things legal, I have to tell you that unless otherwise indicated, all scripture quotations are from the ESV Bible, the Holy Bible English Standard Version, copyright 2001 by Crossway Publishing Ministry of Good News Publishers, used by permission, all rights reserved. There. Now we're legal. So again, glad you're here. It seems to be the case almost every week, and I think it's working out fine. I probably will just continue doing the teaching notes and not do separate handouts anymore. So those are available at journeyoflife.org/course/Revelation, or you can just go to journeyoflife.org and hover over the Worship and Teaching tab, click on Online Courses, and then click on the Revelation course, and you will get right where you need to be. I would suggest that you do these lessons in order because each one of them builds on the previous knowledge that we've already covered. That's not always true in all Bible studies, but I think it's certainly true, especially here toward the beginning of the book of Revelation. If you want to support our church financially, we'd certainly appreciate that. It's a great way to say thank you. You can go to journeyoflife.org/donate, or you can just go to journeyoflife.org, scroll down to the bottom, you'll find a tiny little little link, in the footer that says financially support our ministry. So with that, I think it's time to take my ugly mug off the monitor and go straight to the slides only. Here we go. And on to Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 to 11. So the first thing I'm going to do is just read this to you. It's pretty short, so this might end up being a shorter webinar/podcast than normal, but we didn't actually end up any shorter than normal at the Bible study, so the live version, that is. So we'll see. Here it is. Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna write the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews but are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. So to the church in Smyrna, the first thing I think we want to do is just talk about Smyrna. So we kind of get to know what's going on with Smyrna. Remember that John is on the island of Patmos off the coast of what is now Turkey, then Asia Minor. And if you go take this... if you're watching, you can see there's a trade route kind of thing, a road that goes there. And we already did the church at Ephesus. And if you go 40 miles north of Ephesus, you get to another city called Smyrna, which is also a port city on a river, as so many cities were. And I want to tell you a little bit about Smyrna. So this first little bit comes from the New Bible Dictionary. Smyrna was a city in the Roman province of Asia on the Aegean shore of what is now the Asiatic Turkey. There was a Greek colony there from very early on, but it was captured and destroyed by the Lydians about the end of the 7th century BC and virtually ceased to exist until it was refounded on its present site by Lysimachus in the early 3rd century BC. Smyrna grew to be one of the most prosperous cities in Asia Minor. It was a natural port for the ancient trade route through the Hermus Valley, and its immediate hinterland was very fertile. Smyrna was a faithful ally of Rome long before Roman power became supreme in the eastern Mediterranean. Under the empire, it was famous for its beauty and the magnificence of its public buildings. The name of the city now is called Izmir, and it's the second largest city in Asiatic Turkey. Let me give you a little bit more on Smyrna, though, and this little piece is from Nelson's New Illustrated Bible Dictionary. It's a city in Western Asia Minor. It's one of the 7 churches of the Book of Revelation. Smyrna's superb natural harbor made the city an important commercial center. In spite of keen competition from neighboring cities of Ephesus and Pergamum, Smyrna called itself the first city of Asia. As early as 195 BC, Smyrna foresaw the rising power of Rome and built a temple for pagan Roman worship. In 23 BC, Smyrna was given the honor of building a temple to the Roman Emperor Tiberius because of its years of faithfulness to Rome. Thus, the city became a center for the cult of emperor worship, a fanatical religion that later included under such emperors as Nero, 54 to 68 AD, and Domitian, 81 to 96 AD, brought on severe persecution for the early church. So it was a major important city and an especially Roman city, having declared its allegiance to Rome long before Rome had the power to force all the other cities to declare their allegiance. So it was an especially Roman city. All right, so let's go on now to the Bible verses. We've got our little introduction to Smyrna. So Revelation chapter 2, verse 8, you know how this works. I'm going to read each verse to you, and then we're just going to kind of talk through some of the issues and definitions of things and what that verse might mean in some times even for us. So this is Revelation chapter 2, verse 8. To the angel in church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. So just by way of review, angel could be a spiritual being that is the messenger of God to this church. Angel also is just a secular word for sort of official messenger type person. And it could be that the 7 churches sent a delegation to John, and he was given this vision and given a specific message to give to the messenger from each church, who is just a person, part of that, the delegation from all the churches to John, who is exiled on the island of Patmos right now, right? So to the angel in the church of Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. So here again, the speaker is Jesus, and there's really no more definitive description of Jesus than the one who died and came to life. That's clearly Jesus. And in fact, Paul sees the resurrection as the thing that seals Jesus' claims and his teaching. Even over the things that he taught and his crucifixion, it's his resurrection that proves his authority over the world as the judge. There was an incident where Paul was, Paul traveled around, formerly Saul, then Paul. He traveled around as a missionary, and he would go often to the synagogues to go talk to the Jews in that area about Jesus, because, of course, he believed Jesus was the Messiah, because Jesus talked to him after he was resurrected from the dead, and that tends to have an effect on people. So there was one particular instance where Paul went to go talk to the philosophers. There was a place called the Areopagus, which is also called Mars Hill, and the philosophers would gather up there, and they had statues to all the different gods. But they're no fools. They know that they don't know everything. And so there's a statue up there to the unknown God as well. And Paul says, listen, I'm here to tell you, you guys, clearly you're religious. You care about this kind of stuff. And I see you have a statue to the unknown God. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about, is a God who has revealed himself. And he goes on to talk a little bit about Jesus. But the real claim here, I've got it for you on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. It's Acts chapter 17, verses 30 to 31. Paul, talking to all these philosophers who are willing to listen to him in this area where they like to sit and talk about things, says this: "The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." So that's the big deal right there. And that's, remember, the Greek philosophical types to whom Paul is speaking don't have any sort of Jewish background or Jewish beliefs. And so when he goes to the synagogue, of course, he can talk about the law and the prophets and Moses and Elijah and David and all that stuff. But when he goes to the Greek philosophy types up here on the Areopagus, he can't, none of that makes any difference to them. They don't know about it, and really they just don't care about it probably. So the one thing he has to say that gets their attention, and some of them think he's a lunatic, and some of them said, well, you don't sound like a lunatic, and that's a very interesting claim. We'd like you to come back and talk more tomorrow. But his big claim is that there is a God. You guys all know there's a God because you're making all these statues. But I met the guy who is actually going to be the judge of the world, and God has verified this by raising him from the dead. So that's the big claim to Jesus' authority, really. And if you think about it, for those who are facing tribulation and death, it would be a great comfort, actually, to be reminded that the person they follow is the one who has gone through death and come out the other side to everlasting life. This idea of Jesus enduring his tribulation and then coming out victorious is also part of a passage that we read, or at least often is read, on All Saints' Day, which is November 1st, which we will be celebrating at Journey of Life this Sunday in Orlando. So come visit us for our All Saints' Day service. If you're in the area, 10 o'clock, go to journeyoflife.org and find out where it is. So Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 2, talks about Jesus, and it talks about all those who have gone before, who've died and are with Christ now. Here's what it says, Hebrews 12, 1 to 2. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." And so there we see that Jesus has gone through his tribulation, and now he is seated at the right hand of God, and he's the one that we follow. And so when we face our own tribulation, we remember that Jesus went through what he went through for the joy that is set before him. And also those who have gone on ahead of us, this great cloud of witnesses that the author of Hebrews talks about, they're kind of like the cheering section. They all know what it's like to go through what we've been through, and they're all cheering for us to remain faithful because of the joy set before us. And so that's the encouragement for the Christians in Smyrna who are going to be facing this persecution. And that's what the next verse is about, the persecution. Revelation 2, verse 9. "I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan." So that's pretty serious. So what we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk about this word slander, because that is actually the word blasphemy. We're going to talk about the idea of those who say they're Jews and are not. And we're going to talk about the idea of the synagogue of Satan. And we'll touch also briefly on this idea about poverty and riches. So that's where we're going to go with this verse. And the first thing we want to do is take a look at this idea of slander. That these Jews, the Jews in the area, at least some of them, are slandering the followers of Jesus in the area. So from one of the commentaries I'm reading in preparation for this is a commentary by a professor from the seminary where I went to school. Louie Brighton wrote a commentary on Revelation. And this is what he has to say about slander. Literally, the word slander that's used there in the English Standard Version is the word blasphemy. And if you break apart blasphemy, it literally means abusive speech. Balo is the Greek word for throwing something, and phemi is to speak or to utter something like that. So to throw words at people, and in a negative context, of course. So slander is blasphemy. And this is interesting because, of course, we always think about blasphemy as speaking I don't know. How do you define blasphemy? It's like, attributing things to God that are not godly, something like that, right? But it's actually has a wider definition. Of course, it comes to mean that in some narrow contexts. But blasphemy is this abusive speech, can be spoken against other people or God, of course, or even the devil. I'm going to read for you in a moment Jude 9. In fact, why don't I read it for you right now? This is Jude, the 9th verse of the book of Jude in the New Testament. It says this: "But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" Now, I don't want to disappoint you, but we're not going to go anywhere near this idea about the devil and Archangel Michael disputing over the body of Moses. But what we are looking at is that even the Archangel Michael did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." And there's a couple of ways to actually take that. One of them is what I brought to our live Bible study last night. And, Wednesday night now. You don't need to know that because I don't even know when you're going to be listening to this. But one of them was what I brought, and then another person brought up a different perspective, which I thought was very interesting. My perspective is just that blasphemy is harsh speech, right? That's what we already looked at. It's like harsh words against people. And abusive speech is what Dr. Brighton calls it. And the New Testament talks a lot about having our speech be sweet and seasoned with salt and things like that. I'm a fan of Lord of the Rings, and one of the things that is valued in people in Lord of the Rings is courteous speech. That even against your worst enemy, you are still courteous with them. And so when I was thinking about this verse, about the archangel not pronouncing a blasphemous judgment, I was thinking about he's courteous even though he's disputing with Satan over the body of Moses. He's talking to his arch enemy basically, but he's still courteous with him. He doesn't speak abusively toward him. And I thought for us that's a lesson in public discourse and how to dispute with people with whom you strongly disagree, that we don't have to resort to abusive speech, which often, I think ad hominem would be the rhetorical classification of that, where you begin to attack the person and call them names instead of speak clearly and thoughtfully about what's going on or the ideas in question or whatever. So there was no harsh abusive speech there, even in that sense. Now, someone in the Bible study came with a different approach, and she said another way to look at that is that the devil is really is right. I mean, he's a fallen archangel. He's powerful. He's like equal, might even be more powerful than Michael, the archangel with whom he's disputing. And so even though Michael's an archangel, he's up against this powerful adversary, the devil. And so Michael brings the Lord into the situation instead of going up against the devil on his own power. So, which I think is also a good lesson. Either way, it's a good lesson. But back to blasphemy, because that's what we're trying to talk about here, is the slander, the blasphemy of those that are Jews but are not, but are synagogue of Satan. So in some way or another, these Jews are blaspheming, are speaking abusively against the Christians in Smyrna. And it might even be falsely accusing them in courts and things like that too. So Jesus, in the passage, reminds his followers in Smyrna that he knows what they're going through. He says, though they live in earthly poverty, they are spiritually rich. And this is exactly the opposite that we're going to find of another church as we move forward in the book of Revelation. This is going to be in Revelation 3, verse 17. We're going to read about the church in Laodicea. And that church thinks they're rich and well off. But when we get there, you'll see that Jesus says, you don't realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. So he's reminding them that your earthly poverty, you might have earthly poverty, but you are spiritually rich. And that's you have a temporary poverty, but you have eternal riches. And if you're going to choose one or the other, choose the eternal instead of the temporary, right? So, on to those that say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So true Jews, they say they are Jews, but they are not. True Jews, according to the New Testament, are those who follow Abraham, including his looking forward to, and now for the Christians, believing in the Messiah. And so true Jewishness isn't a matter of your genetic heritage. It's a matter of your beliefs and your allegiances. Jesus said this to some Jewish leaders who were against him and against what he taught, or at least speaking against what he taught. This is from John chapter 8, verses 39 to 40. They, this is the leaders, answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. And so Jesus is telling them, listen, to be Abraham's child is to follow in the ways of Abraham, and you aren't doing that. So you can't really claim to be Abraham's children, which ties in with this idea of these people who claim to be Jews but aren't. Paul writes the same thing to the Christians in Rome also. So you got Jesus talking about Jewishness being following the ways of Abraham, and Revelation, and now Paul also says the same thing in Romans chapter 2, verses 28 to 29. He writes, no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. And so Paul also here teaches that the idea of true Jewishness has to do with your heart and your faith, not your blood and your whether or not you're circumcised and things like that. So speaking of those who are Jews, but are not. He says, and this is rather harsh, but it's not discourteous. It's just strongly worded. They are a synagogue of Satan. Now, I would likely say that Jesus isn't saying that they have become Satanists, but rather they are doing the work that Satan would have them do. Just like if you remember one time, Jesus said something about how he was going to have to go die, and Peter said, "No way, never." And Jesus turned around and to Peter, one of the inner circle of three, and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." So we're going to pause here for a moment. We're going to take just a couple minutes today and do and look into this idea and person of Satan a little bit, and preview. Next week, we're actually going to do our whole hour on Satan. And that's really not very much in the grand scheme of things, but Satan, the devil, the serpent, all these different ways of talking about him, they come up enough in Revelation that our live in-person Bible study, we decided that would probably be beneficial to stop, take a break here and do a week on really getting familiar with what the Bible says about Satan. So that's what we're going to do next week. So you don't want to miss that either. But back to Satan here today. Satan is a Hebrew word, actually. Let me see here. Okay, I lost my place here for one. Satan's a Greek word, but it's taken from a primitive Hebrew word. So the word Satan or Satan is really, really old. It's in terms of the sound, the cognates of that word go from English all the way back through Greek, back into Hebrew. It's a very old word. If you walk up to a Hebrew in 1000 BC and said Satan or Satan, I don't know how they would accent the syllables, but but the STN, Satan, those consonants would be there, and they would know what you're talking about. It's really old. A couple of other words that are really, really old, and you might find this comforting, are beer and wine. You could probably go to somebody in 1000 BC Hebrew and say, beer, and hold out your hand, and they would know what you wanted. Or wine. I think it was yayin back then, but they would probably be able to figure out what you're trying to ask for. Anyway, so back to Satan. The Hebrew word from which Satan comes. Okay, I'm going to read you a couple of things I pulled out of books because I don't know everything. I need books. So this is from Nelson's New Illustrated Bible Dictionary. The Hebrew word from which Satan comes sometimes refers to human enemies, as in 1 Samuel or 29 or Psalm 109. I'm not going to keep quoting those Bible verses because if you're only listening, you're not going to remember them. And if you're watching or you've pulled out downloaded this teaching notes, then you've got them in front of you. So either way, I don't need to keep giving you the references. So Satan, the word, sometimes refers to human enemies. Once it actually refers to an angel, one of God's angels. I don't know if you remember the story of Balaam's donkey, but Balaam was a prophet, and he had been hired by a king who opposed Israel to go and prophesy against Israel, and he was going to go do that because they were going to pay him well. And the Bible says that God sent an angel to be a Satan to Balaam. So there we get back to that idea of Satan as Hebrew, as that obstructor or accuser or attacker. I don't think I said that before. Well, okay, so 2 nights ago I had to take my son to the emergency room, and I didn't get home till 3 a.m. So I'm still a little loopy from that. It takes me a couple days to get back on my feet mentally after one of those. So the word Satan, in its root, it comes to mean to designate a person, the archenemy of God. But in its root, it means obstructor, accuser, or attacker. So this angel that was to be a Satan for Balaam was to go obstruct Balaam. Usually in fact, almost always in this, both in the Old and New Testament, it's quite clear when the word Satan is being used in its generic sense of an obstructor or an accuser, and when it's being used as a proper name for the great superhuman enemy of God, the fallen angel Lucifer, who becomes Satan, the obstructor and accuser incarnate. And often it'll even use the definite article for that, like the Satan. Let me just give you a little bit more. This is from Easton's New Bible Dictionary. If you don't have a Bible dictionary and you like to study the Bible, you really should get one or more Bible dictionaries. They're all online now, though, so you can find a good site for that, I'm sure. Probably Bible.org or something. I don't know. I have my own software, so I don't really know where those are. But you can find them quick as lightning, I'm sure. So this is Satan from Easton's New Bible Dictionary. When used as a proper noun, the Hebrew word usually so rendered has the article, so it'll be called the adversary, like in Job. In the New Testament, Satan is used interchangeably with diabolos, which we translate as the devil. It's also the word from which we get words like diabolical and stuff like that. And is so used more than 30 times. He, Satan, is also called the dragon and the old serpent, the prince of this world, the prince of the power of the air, the god of this world, the spirit that is now working in the children of disobedience. The distinct personality of Satan and his activity among men are thus obviously recognized. He tempted our Lord in the wilderness. He is Beelzebub, the prince of devils. He is the constant enemy of God, of Christ, of the divine kingdom, of the followers of Christ, and of all truth, full of falsehood and all malice, and exciting and seducing to evil in every possible way. His power is very great in the world. He is a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Men are said to be taken captive by him. Christians are warned against his devices and called on to resist him. Christ redeems his people from him that had the power over death, that is the devil. Satan has the power of death, but not as Lord, simply as executioner. He's the accuser who holds the penalty of sin over our head, and Jesus is the one who takes our penalty on himself, and so we can disregard the accusatory voice of Satan in our head, reminding us of our faults and failings and shortcomings, and even the evil that really does live within us, because Jesus has taken care of all that. That's the good news, that we are free. We can be free from the accusing voices in our own head as we trust and follow Christ. And that's like good news with a capital G to me. That's amazing. That is amazing news. So we're warned. I just want to give you a little aside here. We are warned against Satan's devices, and Satan uses people. In this verse we're looking at right now, it talks about Satan using people to throw the Christians into prison, which we're going to get to in a moment. But his devices are also schemy, slimy, word trick, kind of subtle types of things that attempt to twist our thinking too. C.S. Lewis, great book called, give me a moment, I'm not very good at pulling book titles off the top of my head. It's not The Great Divorce, which is also a good book. It is, oh crud. It's the book about the Screw Tape Letters. Yes, thank you, whoever said that. It's probably all of you, although you said it like long after I recorded this. But anyway, in the Screw Tape Letters, a senior tempter writes letters to a junior beginning devil tempter, and he's advising him on how to handle his particular subject. And he says all sorts of interesting things. I sure encourage you to read the Screw Tape Letters. to get an idea of all the different ways that our thoughts can be subtly twisted against the ways of God and of good. Moving along, Revelation chapter 2, verse 10. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown, the crown of life. So in this verse, we want to talk. We're going to talk briefly about the devil again. We're definitely going to talk about 10 days and what that might mean. We're going to talk about a crown of life. We'll probably touch on testing then too, and of course not fearing. Remember, as we get through Revelation, you're going to see a lot of crazy imagery, a lot of frightening stuff. Sounds like it's happening, but the point of Revelation is always this: do not fear. That's what Revelation is written. Even though it seems creepy, it's written to help us not be afraid. So always keep that in mind. All right, so here we go. The devil, we already said that's a synonym for Satan, especially when it's got the definite article in front of it, the devil. Then it's that person, the devil, not just somebody who's acting like a devil. For you word lovers out there, diabolos literally means someone who throws something, like a spear or an arrow or an accusation. So again, there's a hurling of things at people. And in this case, he's going to use other people to hurl them into prison. They're going to be tested for 10 days. So I don't know if you ever heard or read what I wrote when I said I finally think I might be ready to study Revelation, because I love science. I love precision. And so my mind naturally moves in that direction. And that's so not what's going on in Revelation, that I didn't really feel like I was ready to study Revelation until I turned about 50. And I don't know what happened, but maybe in all my reading or whatever. But anyway, my mind began to be more okay with metaphor and non-precise language even. Or at least language that the precision isn't directed at the literal meaning of the word, but points you to something else. And that's what this 10 days is. It absolutely does not mean 10 literal days. He's not telling them how many days they're going to be in prison. So let's talk about this 10 for a moment. And I'm bringing you a piece again from that commentary I've been reading by Louie Brighton. In the Old Testament, he writes, 10, as in the 10 Commandments, symbolizes the perfection of God in the human context. There are also 10 plagues when God freed the Israelites from their slavery. The number 7 symbolizes the perfection of God unto himself. The number 10 was used to symbolize events or time periods which would be total and complete. It could also signify an event or a period of short duration, not always literally 10. Here, the 10 days indicate a short but intense period of time, a complete period as regards to God's timetable. So there's a couple of things in there that are important. It's a defined time according to God's timetable. This is when you get thrown into prison. It's not outside of God's control. This is all part of what's going on, and Jesus sees what's going on, and it's part of what's going to happen. So you need to just be faithful as you walk through it. 10 indicates an intense period of time. It's going to be a complete period of time. It's basically, you're going to be thrown in prison until your prison time is complete. But it's a declared completeness from God's point of view, even though from your point of view, you will not know how long it is. And I want to tell you about some studies that have been done about who has made it through difficult difficult circumstances of unknown time periods. Prisoners of war, they did some studies on who came through prisoner of war experience the most mentally healthy. There were some people there who just gave up, of course. They felt like they'd never get out. It was too late. They were going to be killed any day, blah, 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 right? Like that. I shouldn't blah, blah, blah. That's horrible when it comes to that. But anyway, there were some who gave up. There were others who tried to keep their spirits up by setting artificial deadlines without any knowledge, basically. They were the ones who'd say, well, we'll be out by Christmas for sure. I know we will. Keep a stiff upper lip, gents. Or whatever like that, and then that wouldn't happen. So then they'd say, I'm sure we'll be out by Easter. Oh, we gotta be out by Easter. And then they would just keep setting those. And of course they're setting themselves up for disappointment because they're making up deadlines without any knowledge at all. The ones who survived with the least long-term mental damage were the ones who stayed hopeful, but did not tie that to any sort of arbitrary goal or deadline kind of thing. So they said, I know we're going to get out. They're working on the outside. No one's killed us yet. It doesn't look like they're going to kill us. And we're going to end up winning this war, so we're going to get out of here sometime. And you can see the difference, right? Because those people could settle into their circumstances while remaining hopeful. And that is huge. That's huge in so many different circumstances, to be able to settle into your current circumstance, because then you can really deal with what's going on instead of just holding up this little light at the end of the tunnel thing, which really causes you to avoid mentally dealing with what's going on in front of you, because you're always just saying, well, there's the light at the end of the tunnel. There's the light. So here, that's what we have. 10 days just means a complete period of time. And it could be intense. What do we got next here? Let's see. Right? None of this is a surprise to God. So that's why they need not fear. The Christians here in Smyrna are one of two churches that don't get any corrective word from Christ. You'll recall the church at Ephesus, one of the verses says, but I have this against you. And it goes on like that. There is no, but I have this against you for the church in Smyrna. And I think this is kind of interesting because if you remember the church at Ephesus, it said they had left their first love. And it seemed like they were trying to endure their what they were going through kind of their own will and strength and stubbornness. And I think Jesus is telling them that that's a formula for possibly not making it through, because your will is not enough. Here we have the Christians in Smyrna who are told they're going to go through something. But evidently they haven't lost their first love like the Christians in Ephesus had. Evidently their hearts were just still directed toward God and his love for all people in the world, and serving others, and all the things that the call of Christ is for our lives. So their own will wouldn't be enough to pull them through, but here they will make it through. I do want to give you if you are facing something, there is 3 chapters of the Bible specifically where Jesus is about to die, and he has these comforting words he gives to his disciples. It's in John chapters 14, 15, and 16. And he talks about all the things they're going to go through and what they can expect, and it's not all sunshine and daisies. In the end of that passage, though, it's John chapters 14, 15, and 16, and I suggest you go read it. At the end of that section, it's John chapter 16, verse 33, he says this, which matches up with Jesus telling the Christians in Smyrna what's about to happen, so they will know. In John 16, verse 33, Jesus says, I've said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Okay, so now we want to talk about the crown of life for a moment. The promise regarding the crown of life is quite similar to what James wrote. James was the brother of Jesus, and he wrote this in a letter that he wrote that's been included as part of the New Testament. This is James chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. So there's the crown. Same thing, same imagery we find all throughout the New Testament. Let's talk about crowns for a moment, though. Crowns can symbolize authority, or they can publicly acknowledge a victory. Think about for authority, of course, you have a king's crown or the queen's crown and things like that. It appears that the high priest also wore a crown, at least early in Israel's history. But the same kind of wording is used for the wreath of leaves given to the winner of an athletic competition. Think like the Olympics, the Greek games, they get the little crown of whatever the little leafy thing is. And the Roman soldiers even mocked Jesus by putting a crown like that, only made of thorns, on his head. Later on in the book of Revelation, we're going to see Christ portrayed as having many crowns, which of course would look fairly weird if it was literal, but it's not. But the many crowns signify his authority over all others. Our inheritance also, as Christians, is described symbolically as a crown, which we just read here in James and also in Revelation. Crowns, in fact, are so metaphorical of honor and glory that in one place, people are even called crowns. In Paul's letter to the church in 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 19 to 20, Paul writes this, For what is our hope or joy or crown of boasting before our Lord Jesus at his coming? Isn't it you? For you are our glory and joy. So Paul's crown is actually the other people that have come to faith in Christ through him. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. All right. Last verse, Revelation chapter 2, verse 11. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. As before, this idea of he who has an ear, let him hear, that doesn't excuse people who had their ears cut off. It's just another way of saying, listen, if you're hearing this, hear it, right? And then the other thing is, it's to the churches. Each of these letters say to the church in blank, write this, and to the church in blank, write this. But it's also to all the churches, which means it's also to us. And then he says, the one who conquers overcomes, just like from the last church, the church of Ephesus. Only this time he says, the one who conquers will not be hurt by, that's a weird word, by the second death. What in the world is the second death? Guess what? I'm not going to tell you. Well, no, we will find out, but I'm not going to tell you now because it's the second death is toward the end of the book. You can go look it up if you want to. It's in Revelation, and I will give you the reference here. If you read through Revelation chapter 20 and 21, you will see 3 references to the second death. It's part of the whole thing. But that's all we're going to do for today. We've spent 49 minutes talking through Revelation 2, verses 8 to 11, 4 verses. What can I say? There's a lot to be said, a lot to talk through on Revelation. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad you have stayed this far with me. I hope that you will make plans to grab the next episode where we talk about the next church. I want to encourage you to share this with your friends. Subscribe if you're on YouTube. Subscribe to the podcast. Help let your friends know about this Bible study if you find it uplifting. You can go to journeyoflife.org. That's obviously you can get info about our church. That's where you can get to our YouTube channel, podcast, blog, and that'll also take you to subscribe links for iTunes, Stitcher, and other podcasting sites. Again, if you want to support us financially, we'd appreciate that too. Go to journeyoflife.org/donate, or just scroll down to the bottom and look for the tiny little financially support us link. And again, my email is john@journeyoflife.org. And I am John Rollison. And I'm glad you were with us. And I hope I didn't say anything too goofy, because I was still a little out of it from being at the emergency room with my son till 3 o'clock in the morning the other night. Thanks for listening or watching. God bless you. Until next time, farewell.